I need you to focus for a moment and stay with me, because this matters. Near the end of last week, the President of the United States grabbed a phone and unleashed a stream of profanity at a U.S. senator from an own Democrat, not a political rival, a Republican, someone on his own side. Why did it happen? Because she voted to place limits on his authority. Keep listening. What I'm about to explain is something America hasn't witnessed in a very long time, and I don't say that lightly. I've gone back and looked. Real, organized pushback against a sitting president by members of his own party, especially over war powers, is rare. You have to reach far back to find anything comparable. And this is the key point. This isn't for show. This isn't the usual Washington routine where lawmakers act upset, release statements, and then quietly comply. This is something else. These are Republicans using the law itself to stop their own president from having the power to lead the nation into war. I want you to grasp the weight of this. Imagine the scene. Most of Capitol Hill is quiet, lights off, hallways empty. But inside Senate offices, phones start glowing. Messages fly, staffers compare notes. Senators keep refreshing their screens because what they're seeing feels unreal. The president isn't lashing out at Democrats. He's not attacking the media. He's going after his own party, his own allies, his own senators. And this time, something changes. For the first time in years, they don't retreat. I've been around long enough to tell the difference between real pushback and political theater. I've seen Republicans speak solemnly at microphones, voice deep concern, then vote with the president almost every time. I've seen worried tweets, off-the-record quotes, quiet complaints that never become action. This isn't that. What happened last week was Republicans working with Democrats to move a war powers resolution, a real legal step to limit the president's ability to send U.S. forces into conflict without Congress. Pause on that. Really pause. Members of the president's own party looked at his actions, his words, his threats, and decided guardrails were needed before something permanent occurred. That's not a routine dispute, that's an intervention. And how did Trump react? Did he call to listen? Did he try to reason it out? Did he negotiate? No, he exploded. Reports say he phoned Senator Susan Collins, a Republican who supported the resolution, and unloaded with crude language. Profanity, pressure, intimidation, not persuasion. And this is why it matters. That call tells the whole story of this moment. When someone answers constitutional limits with rage instead of conversation, they reveal how they see power. Not as authority defined by law, not as something shared with another branch, but as something personal, something owned, something no one, not Congress, not the Constitution, not even their own party, is allowed to restrain. That belief is what sparked this rebellion. Now I need to explain what actually triggered all of this, and I need you to sit with it, because at first it will sound ridiculous. President Trump has openly, repeatedly, on camera, floated the idea of using military force to take Greenland. Yes, really, I know how that sounds. It sounds like a punchline. It sounds like something misquoted, clipped, or blown out of proportion online. It isn't. The President of the United States has said more than once that military options are possible to seize territory owned by Denmark. Denmark, a NATO ally. A country we are legally committed to defend. Senator Chris Murphy laid this out clearly on the Senate floor, and when he did, the room shifted. Because here's what many Americans don't fully grasp about NATO, and this part matters. Article 5 is the core of the alliance. It says an attack on one member is treated as an attack on all. That single promise has kept Europe from war for 75 years. It's the reason NATO exists at all. Greenland belongs to Denmark. If the United States used force against Greenland, we wouldn't just be confronting Denmark, we'd be attacking NATO itself. We'd be at war with our own allies. We'd be tearing apart the most successful military alliance ever built. Sit with that. U.S. senators are now forced to treat this not as speculation, not as theory, but as a real risk. An American president dragging the country into conflict with Europe over territorial conquest. This is not normal. This is not strategic pressure. This is not hard bargaining. In any other time, any other presidency, this kind of talk would have ended a career instantly. But that's not the world we're in anymore. To understand why this is happening, you have to understand how this president actually thinks, not the slogans, not the satire, the real logic underneath. Trump doesn't approach global politics like past leaders. He doesn't see alliances as shared responsibility. He doesn't view treaties as binding. He doesn't treat international law as something that applies to him. He sees everything as a transaction. And in transactions, there are winners and losers, pressure and advantage, assets to grab and rivals to overpower. That mindset works in real estate. You can push a seller, you can bluff a competitor, you can walk away from a deal and come back stronger. Alliances aren't contracts you can renegotiate on a whim. Armies exist. Treaties have triggers. Words carry consequences that a phone call can't undo. When a president says military force is on the table to seize allied territory, that's not negotiating, that's threatening. And threats shift everyone's calculations, allies, rivals. Even your own generals. Republican senators get this. Many have sat in classified briefings. They've seen crises escalate in hours, watched conflicts spiral out of control. They know the president's words carry weight that tweets can't erase. That's why they're scared, not because they've turned liberal, not because they hate Trump, but because they see where this path leads, and they don't want to be trapped when it arrives. The War Powers Act exists for this exact moment. Born out of Vietnam, it was Congress saying enough. Presidents cannot drag the country into war without oversight. The law forces consultation, limits action without approval. It's an emergency brake. And last week, Republicans used it against their own president. Unheard of. Think back to that phone call with Senator Collins. That wasn't about one vote, it was a window. When Trump grabbed the phone, lashed out with profanity, threats, treating her vote as betrayal, he exposed how he handles resistance. He doesn't see checks and balances. He sees treachery and existential threat. And that matters. How a leader reacts to no tells you exactly how they'll govern when the pressure really mounts. Trump's second-term playbook is dominance, control, inevitability. The untouchable man. Nothing shatters that image faster than members of your own party publicly voting against you. So he lashed out not with reason, but with intimidation. Here's what the senators noticed: it didn't work. Collins didn't waver. Neither did the other Republicans who crossed the aisle. They took the anger, hung up, went back to work. That failure may matter more than the vote itself. It proved something Trump hasn't fully accepted: political loyalty isn't blind. It's conditional. It depends on shared goals, mutual benefit. When a leader stops providing that, loyalty disappears. And right now, Republican senators are calculating. They're watching the war talk, the emergency threats, and deciding their next move. They're watching the disorder unfold, and they're asking a simple question: what am I actually getting from this? If the answer is only danger, the partnership breaks. That calculation is happening right now inside the Capitol. This isn't about ideology, it's arithmetic. At the same time, something else is happening. The war powers battle isn't the only pressure point. As Republicans were moving to limit military authority, Trump opened another front. He declared a national emergency tied to Venezuelan oil assets. On the surface, it sounds like energy security protecting national interests. But look closely. Any real payoff from those assets would take years, maybe decades. The infrastructure costs would be enormous. The main winners would be global energy companies, not American families. So why call it an emergency? Because emergencies do one thing very well in U.S. law: they centralize power. They let presidents skip normal process, sidestep oversight, and reduce Congress's role. They shift authority away from lawmakers and toward the White House. Emergencies are meant for real, immediate threats. They aren't supposed to be tools for avoiding scrutiny. Yet that's exactly how they're being used. Notice the pattern. Each time oversight tightens, each time Congress asks questions, a new emergency appears. A fresh threat. The focus moves from accountability to crisis response. That isn't random. It's deliberate. Overwhelm the system. Change the subject. Raise the temperature. Count on attention drifting. I've seen this tactic for years, and I'm seeing it again now. The Venezuela emergency isn't really about oil. It's about power. It's about controlling the story. It's about keeping government locked in constant emergency mode, so there's never time for the slow, unglamorous work of oversight. And that oversight is exactly what this president cannot risk. Here's what many people are missing. While headlines fixate on war powers and emergency declarations, a quieter force is building underneath, and it may matter more than all the dramatic clashes. I'm talking about oversight reclines, the dull machinery of accountability. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse isn't shouting. He's asking questions. Specific, procedural questions. Why are promised documents delayed? Why have reviews stretched on with no end? Why have legal deadlines passed without explanation? These aren't attacks, they're process checks. And process checks are what administrations fear most. Here's why. A fiery speech against a president is expected. It's noise. It changes nothing. But questions about inspectors general, missed deadlines, document chains, that's different. That's how a paper trail starts. And paper trails don't care about loyalty. Records don't vanish with a tweet. They don't fade at a rally. They sit in databases and file rooms waiting to be demanded. The administration labeled certain disclosures urgent, transparent, coming soon. The words were loud, but the reality has moved much slower than the promises suggested. And when that gap between talk and action becomes obvious, trust erodes. Once credibility is in doubt, every explanation that follows faces sharper scrutiny. That's the trap Trump is trying to avoid. Asking for an inspector general review isn't an accusation. It's simply acknowledging that something in the process isn't working, maybe mismanagement, competing priorities, or something else. But for a president who treats every question as a personal attack, even neutral oversight feels like combat. And that's the problem. Oversight isn't optional. It's how democracies operate. It keeps power in check. It lets citizens know their leaders are actually doing what they claim. When a president treats oversight as an enemy instead of a safeguard, the system starts to wobble. Here's what Republican senators are really worried about. It's not just Trump. It's what happens afterward. Constitutional norms, once broken, don't fix themselves. Precedents set by one president become tools for the next. Shortcuts taken today become standard practice tomorrow. If one president can declare emergencies to bypass Congress at will, future presidents will too. If one can threaten allies without consequence, the next will push further. If oversight is treated as sabotage, future leaders inherit that playbook. Veteran Republicans get it. They've seen power accumulate. They know defending a president today might mean empowering someone tomorrow they can't control. That's why some are finally drawing lines, not because they suddenly dislike Trump, but because they're thinking institutionally. They're thinking about the Senate's role, about whether Congress will even matter in 10 years if these precedents stand. That's what's driving the revolt. It's not ideology. It's structural. The question is simple. If we don't stop this now, can we stop it later? Increasingly, the answer is no. Once a president proves he answers only to himself, not to law, treaties, or constitutional limits, the office itself changes. It stops being part of a system and becomes the system. That's what some Republicans are trying to prevent, quietly, deliberately, knowing they might fail, but acting anyway because the alternative is worse. And let's bring this down to real life. These power struggles, these debates over process and precedent, they affect real people. Military families feel it first. They're the ones deployed. The ones who don't come home, workers feel it too. Factory orders get canceled. Supply chains snap. Jobs vanish. When allies lose trust in America, everyone feels it. The dollar weakens. Security agreements fray. These aren't abstract issues. They touch lives directly. The world becomes harder to predict. None of this is theoretical. The Greenland talk isn't just embarrassing, it's dangerous. It makes European allies question whether they can rely on American protection. It makes adversaries wonder if they can take advantage. It makes neutral countries rethink which side they want to be on. That loss of trust doesn't happen in a single headline. It builds slowly, deal by deal, relationship by relationship, until one day America finds itself isolated in ways it never imagined. And the emergency declarations aren't just a constitutional worry, they're an economic problem. When presidents use emergency powers to pursue political goals instead of real crises, markets distort, investments misalign, and the economy serves politics, not people. This is what's at stake, not just norms or principles, but lives, livelihoods, and the stability that lets people plan for the future. When government becomes unpredictable, ordinary people pay the price. They're the ones who can't hedge their bets. They're the ones counting on systems working as they should. The Republican revolt isn't just about limiting presidential power. It's about protecting the predictability that makes everyday life possible. So, what happens next? I won't pretend to know. Politics never unfolds in a straight line. Too many personalities, too many variables, too much chaos. But here's what to watch. First, watch the War Powers Resolution. If it passes with enough votes to survive a veto, that's a real constitutional moment. A sign Congress is reclaiming authority after decades of letting it atrophy. Second, watch oversight. Inspector General requests, document demands, subpoenas. If those continue despite pressure, the machinery of accountability is still working. If they stall quietly, that's a warning. Third, watch the Republican coalition. Right now, the senators pushing back are a minority. If that group grows, Trump's leverage shrinks. If it stays isolated, the revolt fades. Fourth, watch Trump's language. When he feels cornered, he escalates. More emergencies, more extreme rhetoric, more loyalty tests. The more pressure, the more dramatic the reaction. And fifth, the most important, watch what happens to the people who said no. Susan Collins. The other Republicans who crossed the aisle. Senators asking uncomfortable questions. Do they face consequences, lose positions, get primaried, or do they survive intact? The answer will show whether resistance is even possible. Whether saying no to this president comes with an acceptable cost, whether the incentives in Republican politics have actually shifted, or this is just a temporary flare, that will decide if this revolt matters or fades like another headline. Let's step back and look at the bigger picture. This isn't really about Trump, not in the long run. It's about something older, more fundamental. Whether the rules that govern power are stronger than the people who temporarily hold it. Every democracy faces this test. At some point, a leader appears who believes the rules don't apply, who sees limits as obstacles, who treats the Constitution as optional. When that happens, the system has a choice. It can bend, it can break, or it can hold. Right now, we're seeing America tested in real time. Emergency powers, lawmakers intimidated, oversight treated as sabotage, pressure against the boundaries, and the boundaries are responding. Not as fast as some want, not as firmly as others hope, but responding. Republicans crossing the aisle, inspectors general receiving formal requests, senators asking tough questions. votes happening that weren't supposed to happen. That's not nothing. It doesn't guarantee the system will hold. History is full of democracies that bent until they broke, tolerating small violations until big ones became normal, waking up to find the rules rewritten while everyone was distracted. But it's not inevitable either. Systems hold when people decide they will, when lawmakers put oaths above careers, when institutions value function over convenience, when citizens stay alert and demand accountability. None of that happens automatically. All of it requires choice. Right now, some people are making that choice imperfectly, incompletely, but they're making it. That's the story beneath all the noise. 3 things to take away. First, this revolt is real. Republicans aren't just voicing private complaints anymore. They're voting. They're advancing resolutions. They're drawing lines they've never drawn before. Success isn't guaranteed, but it's happening, and it matters. Secondly, emergency powers are being weaponized. The pattern is unmistakable. Every time oversight ramps up, a new crisis emerges. The focus shifts from accountability to emergency response. That's not an accident, it's a deliberate strategy. Recognizing that is the first step to not being manipulated by it. Third, precedents outlive presidents. What happens in this fight will shape how power works long after Trump is gone. Shortcuts taken today become the norms of tomorrow. That's why the stakes go far beyond one person or one election. These 3 threads, the revolt, the weaponized emergencies, the precedent problem, are all connected. Different angles, same question: can the system hold a leader who believes he shouldn't be held? We're about to find out. Here's what I'll leave you with. Democracy doesn't defend itself. It relies on people. Lawmakers who take their oaths seriously. Institutions that prioritize function over politics. Citizens who pay attention, even when it's exhausting. Everyone playing their part, holding the line. Right now, some of that is happening. Not enough, not fast enough, but happening. The resistance to Trump isn't coming from outsiders anymore. It's coming from within, from people who know him, who've worked with him, who've defended him, and who've decided some lines can't be crossed. That's significant. It doesn't guarantee a happy ending. History is full of warnings ignored, opportunities missed, systems that bent until they broke. But it is a reminder outcomes aren't predetermined. Choices matter. Individuals in the right moment can change the course of events. We are in that kind of moment. What happens next depends on whether enough people in Congress, in institutions, and among the public decide that the rules matter more than any one individual. That power is a responsibility, not personal property. That democracy is worth the effort it takes to maintain. I'll be watching, and so should you.